Daquan was almost asleep when the signal came through. He sat in the communications room of the ship, staring at his screen and drinking bad coffee. It was 3 in the morning. Nothing ever happened at 3 in the morning. Then his computer started beeping. Day sat up fast. The screen showed a signal coming from deep space far beyond any human colony. The pattern was too perfect to be natural. Someone was sending a message. He told the computer to translate it. The computer worked for 20 minutes before it showed him the words, "Help us, please, our star is dying. We have only months left. Is anyone listening? Please help us," the message kept repeating. Over and over, "Help us, please help us." Day's hands shook as he read it. Attached to the message was something huge. Files and files of data, music, art, pictures, stories. An entire civilization was sending everything they had, everything they were, hoping someone would care enough to help them. Day pressed the emergency button. Captain Yuna needed to see this right now. Yuna came to the bridge 6 minutes later. Her hair was messy from sleep. Kim, the ship's engineer, came with her. They looked tired and confused. Day played the message for them. They listened in silence. When it ended, nobody spoke for a long time. Tay was the first to talk. He said the signal came from the Valorians. They were one of the most advanced species in the galaxy. They had technology that humans could barely understand. Their civilization was thousands of years old. Yuna asked why they were calling for help if they were so advanced. Day showed them the data about their star. Something had broken it, made it sick. It was dying too fast. In a few months, their planet would be dead. Everyone on it would die. Yuna asked if they had called anyone else. Day said yes. The message went everywhere, to all the great civilizations in space. The Valorians were asking everyone for help, but nobody had answered. Only the human ship had picked up the signal. Only humans had stopped to listen. Tay said they should ignore it. Earth Command told them not to contact advanced alien species. They were just a research ship. They had 43 people and some science equipment. What could they do to save a whole planet? Yuna stood quiet for a long time. She walked to the window and looked at the stars. The ship was small, old, nothing special. They had no weapons, no powerful technology, nothing that could help save a dying world. She asked Day to play the message again. They listened to the desperate voices, the fear in the alien words. The message kept saying, "Please. Please help us. Someone please hear us." Yuna turned around. She told them to set a course for the Valorian planet. Maximum speed, Tay tried to argue. He said they couldn't save them. They would get in trouble with Earth Command. This was against the rules. Yuna cut him off. She said she knew they couldn't save the Valorians. She knew they would probably get punished for this. She knew it was against orders. But someone out there was dying and asking for help. The human ship was the only one who answered. Day said quietly that the other civilizations heard the message too. They chose not to come. Yuna said then humans were better than those civilizations. She told Tay to change course. She told Day to send a message to Earth Command explaining what they were doing. She said to wake up the crew. They had 3 weeks to figure out how to save a planet. Tay and Day looked at each other. This was crazy. This broke every rule. They were a small research ship, not heroes. But they had heard the message. They had heard the fear and the hope in it. They both said, "Yes, Captain." The ship turned. Its engines burned bright in the darkness. Behind them, Earth got smaller and smaller. Ahead of them, 47 light years away, an entire world was praying for someone to save them. The great civilizations had heard the prayer. They had calculated the cost. They had decided it wasn't worth it. They sent nothing. Earth sent one small ship with 43 people who cared. As the ship flew through space, Day looked at the stars. He wondered if they were making a huge mistake. The Valorians were ancient. They had amazing technology. If they couldn't save themselves, what chance did humans have? But then he thought about the message again. The way they had sent all their art and music, all their history and stories. They were offering everything they had just for someone to listen, just for someone to care. Maybe technology wasn't what they needed. Maybe they just needed someone to answer when they called. The ship flew on through the darkness. 3 weeks to reach a dying world. 3 weeks to figure out the impossible. 3 weeks before they found out if compassion was enough to save billions of lives. Inside the communications room, Day saved the original message. The first words from the Valorians. the call that only Earth answered. He had a feeling that this message would be important someday, that it would mean something. He didn't know yet that it would become the most important message in human history. The moment when humanity chose to be heroes not because they could, but because they should. The stars kept shining. The Valorian message kept repeating. And one small human ship flew toward the impossible, carrying hope in its engines and courage in its crew. Somewhere in the darkness, the great civilizations watched. They calculated. They measured. They decided humans were fools for trying, but the humans didn't care what anyone thought. Someone needed help. That was enough. The planet appeared on the screen and Juan Choi wanted to cry. Valoria Prime should have been beautiful. The records showed crystal towers reaching into purple skies, gardens floating in the air, oceans that glowed with light. The Valorians had built paradise over 10,000 years. Now it was dying. The oceans were dark and dead. The floating gardens had crashed down. The crystal cities were dim behind failing shields. Above everything, the sun burned orange and sick, pulsing like a dying heart. Lena Song asked how many people lived down there. Day said over 4 billion, across 6 continents. Captain Yuna stood in the center of the bridge. Her face showed nothing, but Juan knew she was scared. They all were. 3 weeks of preparation hadn't made them ready for this. Nothing could prepare you for watching a world die. Yuna asked if the Valorians had answered their calls. Day said yes. They were being directed to land near the capital. But the message was cold. The Valorians didn't sound happy that humans had come. Tay laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. He said the Valorians sent a distress call. What did they expect? Who did they think would come? Juan spoke quietly. He said maybe they expected someone else. To the Valorians, humans were children. Earth only went to space 40 years ago. Valorians had been traveling the stars for thousands of years. He said to imagine you were drowning and the only one who came to save you was a small child. Nobody said anything after that. Yuna ordered a shuttle prepared. She said Juan and Lena would come with her. Tay would stay on the ship. The shuttle ride down was rough. The atmosphere was breaking apart. Storms hit them from every side. Juan held onto his seat and watched the ground get closer. The damage looked worse up close. Whole parts of cities were destroyed. People crowded into areas that still had shields protecting them. They landed in a big plaza. The Valorians came to meet them. They were tall and graceful with pale blue skin and big eyes. They wore robes that changed colors. But their faces showed fear and tiredness and something else. Disappointment. An old Valorian named Thovan led the group. He looked at the 3 humans and his face fell. He asked if they were the ones who answered. His voice was musical but sad. Yuna bowed the way Juan had taught her. She said she was Captain Yuna Park from Earth. They got the distress call and came as fast as they could. Thovan said the word Earth like it tasted bad. He said humans were infants, babies. The Valorians had called to the great civilizations for help. Instead, they got children who barely understood science. Juan felt angry, but Yuna stayed calm. She said the great civilizations heard the call too. They had monitored all signals during the trip. Everyone got the same message. A younger Valorian spoke. Her name was Solane. She wore the robes of a priestess. She asked why only humans came. Yuna said simply because the Valorians needed help. Thovan laughed with no happiness in it. He asked what help humans could give. He said human technology couldn't even save Earth from climate change. How could they save a planet from a dying star? Yuna admitted she didn't know if they could. But they were here to try. Thovan said trying meant nothing. Valorian scientists had studied stars for thousands of years. They couldn't fix this. What made humans think their simple knowledge could work? Lena stepped forward. She said maybe they couldn't save the sun, but they could save the people. Human medicine might help with radiation sickness. Their ships could evacuate cities. They could help. Thovan shouted that they could do nothing. His outburst shocked everyone. The old alien shook. He said humans didn't understand. The Valorians didn't need pity. They didn't need small gestures. They needed salvation. They needed the power to restart their sun, to shield their world, to survive. Humans had none of that. They were insects pretending to be gods. Yuna's face got tight, but her voice stayed level. She said Thovan was right. Humans weren't gods. They were just people who heard someone calling for help. Before Thovan could answer, alarm screamed across the city. Everyone looked east where a protective dome was failing. The shimmering energy died. Thousands of Valorians were suddenly exposed to deadly radiation and poison air. Celine gasped. She said the eastern sector had children in the schools there. The Valorian officials started shouting orders. They tried to coordinate rescue teams. But Juan saw the truth in their eyes. They wouldn't get there in time. Their vehicles were too slow, too few. He looked at Yuna. She looked back and nodded. Juan ran for the shuttle. Thovan called after him, asking what he was doing. Juan shouted back that he was helping. Lena was already moving. She grabbed medical supplies. Yuna called the ship. She told Tay to send atmosphere data for the eastern sector. She said to send every protective suit they had. The humans moved fast. It surprised the Valorians. In minutes, the shuttle was flying toward the collapsed dome. Juan flew while Lena prepared medical stations. Through the window, they saw Valorians in the streets trying to reach the schools. Their bodies were already suffering from radiation. Lena pointed at 3 buildings. She said she read life signs there. Juan landed as close as he could. The air was poison. Hard to see through. He sealed his suit and stepped out into hell. The Valorian children huddled in the buildings. Their teachers tried to shield them with their own bodies. Juan's suit said the radiation would kill in minutes. He started carrying children to the shuttle. They were lighter than human children. Delicate. They looked at him with big, scared eyes. They didn't understand why this strange alien was helping them. Lena worked desperately. She treated burns. She gave medicine from Earth that might work on Valorian bodies. More crew came in another shuttle. They joined the rescue. Juan made trip after trip. His muscles screamed. His suit warned him constantly. He lost count of how many children he carried. He just focused on the next one. And the next. And the next. When Valorian rescue teams finally arrived, the humans had saved 247 children and 16 teachers. Juan collapsed against the shuttle. His suit was almost dead. His body was exhausted. Celine was there. She had come with the rescue teams. She stared at Juan, then at the children being loaded onto Valorian transports. She whispered, asking why. Why would he risk his life for Valorian children? Humans didn't even know them. Juan took off his helmet. He breathed hard. He said because they needed help. That was enough. Back at the plaza, Thovan was waiting. He looked at the humans covered in dust and radiation burns. Exhausted but alive. He looked at reports about the children they saved. He started to say something, then stopped. His pride and his gratitude fought inside him. Finally, he said he was wrong to speak that way. Yuna stepped forward. She said Thovan was scared. His world was dying, and the people he thought would save him didn't come. He had every right to be angry. Thovan said quietly that he shouldn't be angry at humans. The great civilizations calculated that Valorians weren't worth saving. But humans came anyway. Yuna said they were here. They weren't leaving until they found a way to help. The question was, would Thovan let them try? Thovan looked at his people. At the dying sun above, at the small group of humans who risked everything to save children they never met. He said yes. Yes, they would let humans try. The research team met in a laboratory deep under the Capitol. The room was full of floating screens showing the dying sun. The calculations made Day's head hurt just looking at them. Jun Lee stood in the middle presenting his idea. He was young for a scientist, only 30 years old. His hair was messy and he had coffee stains on his shirt. The Valorians looked at him like he was crazy. Tay looked at him like he wanted to die. A Valorian scientist named Vel asked Jun to explain again. He wanted to use the weapon that destroyed their sun to fix their sun. Jun said not exactly. He pulled up new images. The weapon didn't destroy the sun. It corrupted it, made the fusion process wrong. The sun was eating itself the wrong way. But if they could interrupt that process and force a controlled collapse, they could restart the fusion correctly. Vel said flatly that it was impossible. They had run those calculations 1,000 times. The energy needed was too much. Jun interrupted. He said the energy was available if they used the weapon's power against itself. The Valorians built the weapon to disrupt fusion. It was still there in the sun's core. If they could reach it and reverse it, they could use it to reset the whole process. Tay spoke up. He asked what Jun meant by reach it. June said it meant flying into the sun. The room went silent. June said into the corona technically. About 200,000 kilometers deep. Lena looked up from medical reports. She said no ship could survive that. The heat alone would destroy anything they had. Jun agreed that Valorian ships couldn't do it. But what if they combined technologies? Human heat shields with Valorian energy shields. Human engines with Valorian power systems. Vel's big eyes got bigger. He asked if Jun was serious. If he really thought this could work. Jun said quietly it was the only option they had. The star would go critical in 46 days. There was no time for a better plan. Yuna had been listening quietly. Now she stepped forward. She asked what the chances were of success. Jun met her eyes. He said honestly, maybe 30%. If everything went perfectly. Yuna asked about the pilot. Jun said the pilot wouldn't survive. Even if the mission worked, there was no way to get a ship back out of the corona in time. The room went silent again. 30% chance to save a world. 100% chance to die trying. A voice came from the doorway. It said she would do it. Everyone turned. Sua Jaeon stood there in her pilot suit. She was small and young with quick eyes and steady hands. She had flown more dangerous missions than anyone on the crew. Asteroids, stellar debris. She had nerves of steel. Yuna started to say no, but Sua interrupted. She said she was the best pilot they had. Yuna knew it was true. Someone had to fly this mission. It should be someone who knew what they were doing. Thovan said he couldn't allow it. A human dying for Valoria was wrong. This was their world. Their problem. If anyone should sacrifice themselves, it should be a Valorian. Sua said gently that Valorians were dying already. Every day they lost hundreds to radiation and atmosphere failure. They needed every Valorian alive to rebuild later. But Earth could spare one pilot. Thovan struggled for words. He said Sua shouldn't be willing to die for them. Valorians had treated humans with contempt, called them children and insects. Why would she sacrifice herself for people who insulted her? Sua smiled sadly. She said 4 billion people were depending on getting this right. That was bigger than insults. Bigger than pride. Bigger than her. Dave felt his throat get tight. He had known Sua for 3 years. She was always joking. Always confident. Always alive. The thought of her flying into a sun and never coming back made him sick. But he saw the determination in her eyes. She had decided. Over 3 weeks, the teams worked 18-hour days building the impossible ship. They took apart a Valorian scout ship and rebuilt it with human technology. Valorians gave advanced shields and power cores. Humans added heat protection and manual controls and what Tay called aggressive hope in the face of physics. Word spread across Valoria about the plan. About the human pilot who would fly into their sun to save them. About the crew who came from across the stars not because they had to, but because they wanted to. The contempt disappeared. In its place grew wonder, gratitude, shame. Celine visited the construction bay one evening. She watched the humans work. She found Juan adjusting sensors and sat beside him. She asked if she could ask something. Juan said of course. She asked why. She understood Yuna's honor. She understood Sua's courage. But why did all of them stay? They could leave. Nobody would blame them. They tried to help. That was more than the great civilizations did. Juan put down his tools. He asked if she knew what humanity almost did to itself. Soline said she knew about their climate crisis. They studied it when they first found Earth. Juan said humans almost destroyed themselves through greed. They almost made Earth unlivable. But they stopped. Not because they got smarter or better. They stopped because enough people decided the future mattered more than the present. That other people's lives mattered as much as their own. He looked at her. Valorians were dying through no fault of their own. An ancient weapon was killing them. If humans could help stop that, how could they not try? Soline said bitterly that the great civilizations calculated Valorians weren't worth saving. They looked at the cost and decided to let them die. Juan said simply that the great civilizations were fools. Any civilization that could watch others die and call it efficiency wasn't advanced. It was just old. Meanwhile, Earth fleet was responding. When word reached Earth about Valoria's crisis, something unexpected happened. Ships volunteered. Not military ships, but civilian ones. Mining ships. Transport ships. Research ships like the Horizon's Edge. Even old patrol boats from the outer planets. Bin Kang arrived commanding this mixed fleet. 15 ships total. He was a military man. Practical and direct. When he saw Valoria Prime, he immediately started planning evacuations. He told Una and Thovan privately that they couldn't save everyone, but they could get important people to underground shelters. They could evacuate coastal cities before the oceans boiled. They could save millions even if they couldn't save the planet. Thovan said the mission would succeed, but his voice had doubt. Bin said maybe. But they prepare for failure anyway. That's how you save lives. The Valorians watched the human fleet arrive. They saw the old ships, the different designs, ships held together with hope and repairs. It was nothing like the grand fleets of the great civilizations. No overwhelming power, no advanced technology that seemed like magic, just humans. People who heard a call for help and answered. 4 days before launch, a message came from the great civilizations. All of them at once. They offered help now. 3 weeks too late. They offered ships and resources and technology. Thovan read the message in front of the combined council. Then he deleted it. He said they didn't need their help anymore. Bell nodded. He said they had better allies now. The ship was ready. Sua stood in front of it looking up. It was ugly. A mix of human and Valorian technology that no sane engineer would approve. But it would fly. It would get her into the sun. Whether it would survive long enough to finish the mission was another question. Una came to say goodbye. She tried to find words, to thank Sua, to tell her how brave she was. Everything sounded hollow. Sua said quietly that if this worked, would Una tell her parents she was thinking of them? Una said Sua could tell them herself when they got home. They both knew that wasn't true. Sua smiled. She said, "Sure, Captain." When we get home, she climbed into the ship. The mission was 6 hours away and the sun kept dying. The sun filled Sua's screen. It was angry and orange and dying. She sat in the pilot seat with her hands on the controls. The cockpit was small and cramped. Screens showed temperature and shield strength and the corona getting closer. Behind her, the device Jun built hummed with energy. Sua said she was 90 seconds from the corona boundary. Her voice was calm, professional. She was always good at hiding fear. On the horizon's edge, Una stood on the bridge watching the data. The whole crew was there, silent. On Valoria's surface, billions watched their screens, humans and Valorians together, holding their breath. Una asked about shield status. Tay said they were holding, but temperature was already critical. Sua wasn't even in the corona yet. Una's hands gripped her chair. There was nothing she could do now. Nothing but watch and pray. Sua's ship hit the corona and everything became fire. The shields flared white as they absorbed impossible heat. Temperature inside the cockpit jumped despite cooling systems. Sweat poured down Sua's face. Her instruments screamed warnings. The hull started to glow. She said shields at 60%. She was adjusting her approach angle. She flew deeper. The sun's magnetic fields tried to tear her ship apart. Solar flares erupted around her. Each one carried enough energy to destroy a planet. She dodged and weaved and pushed forward. She said shields at 40%, hull temperature critical. On Valoria, Selene stood in the Grand Temple leading prayers, not to their old gods but to the human pilot flying into fire to save them. Around her, thousands of Valorians knelt, praying for a miracle. In the coastal city of Meridian, Rei Hong flew a shuttle full of refugees. She was evacuating people to underground shelters, following Bin's evacuation plan. The city was falling apart around her. Buildings crumbled as the dome failed. The ocean was starting to boil. She called control. She said she had 3,000 civilians on board. But she was reading another group trapped in Section 42. Children from the medical ward. Bin's voice came back. He said negative. She was at maximum capacity. Return to shelter coordinates. Ray looked at her co-pilot Minho Yu. He looked back. They both knew what to do. She said, "Sorry, control. There must be interference." She didn't copy that last message. She turned the shuttle around, heading for Section 42. On the surface, Gina Han coordinated evacuations from a command post that was being destroyed by storms. She was Earth's diplomat, trained to negotiate and talk, not to run disaster response, but she refused to leave her post. She reported the northern area was clear. Southern area needed 30 more minutes. Someone said they didn't have 30 minutes. The dome was failing now, Gina said, then they work faster. She kept directing refugees to safety. Inside the sun, Sua was dying. shields at 15%. Temperature inside the cockpit was 85 degrees. Her cooling suit was failing. She could smell burning plastic as systems died. The ship's hull was melting. She said June's name. She gasped that she wasn't going to make it to the coordinates. On the horizon's edge, Jun felt his heart stop. He ran the calculations again. The numbers didn't change. She was right. The ship was breaking down too fast. Yuna ordered her to abort. "Get out of there," Sua said. "No time, Captain. If she turned around now, she'd never make another pass. The ship wouldn't survive it." Yuna said then Sua was ordering her own death. Her voice cracked. Sua said gently she was completing her mission. But she needed Jun to recalculate. If she diverted all shield power forward and increased speed, could she reach the weapon? Jun's fingers flew over his console. He said yes, but the rear shields would fail completely. The ship would break apart. Sua asked if it would get her there. Jun paused, then said yes. Sua said then send her the updated course. Yuna started to say her name, but Sua interrupted. She said it was okay, Captain. This was what she came to do. Please don't take that from her. Yuna closed her eyes. When she opened them, tears ran down her face. She said, "Godspeed, Lieutenant John." Sua said, "Thank you, Captain. It had been an honor." Sua diverted all power to front shields. The rear of the ship immediately started breaking apart, torn up by solar wind and heat, but the front held. She pushed the engines to maximum, driving deeper into the sun. The coordinates appeared on her screen. The ancient weapon was there, embedded in the sun's core like a cancer. She could see it on sensors, a massive structure of technology so advanced it seemed like magic. She said 30 seconds to target. Her voice was strained. The heat was unbearable. She could barely breathe. On the horizon's edge, Tay made a decision. He said he was suiting up, taking a shuttle down. Maybe he could help. Sua's voice cut in. She said no. "Stay there, Tay. The ship needed him. Valoria needed him." She coughed. 20 seconds. Thovan watched from the surface. The old Valorian's face was wet with tears. Around him, billions of his people watched a human sacrifice herself for them. A species they called insects. A pilot they never met. "Dying so they could live," he whispered. "Why? Why would you do this for us?" As if hearing him, Sua spoke one last time. She said because someone had to. 10 seconds, the ship was barely together. Sua could see the weapon now, a massive sphere of impossible technology. She lined up the final approach. Her hand steady despite everything. She said 5 seconds. 4, 3. The rear half of the ship exploded. Solar fire flooded the cockpit. Sua screamed, 2, 1. She triggered the device. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the weapon activated, its polarity reversed by June's design. It pulsed once, twice, sending waves of energy through the sun's core. The corrupted fusion reaction stuttered, stopped, and reignited properly. The sun flashed brilliant white. The orange sickness disappeared from its light. The pulses steadied. The star began to heal. On Valoria, the light changed. The toxic orange glow became clean white. The storms began to calm. Temperature started dropping. It worked. On the horizon's edge, every alarm said success. The sun was stable. The planet would survive, but Sua's signal was gone. Yuna stood frozen, staring at the empty screen where Sua's data had been. Tay was crying openly. Day sat with his head in his hands. Around them, the crew mourned. On Valoria, Thovan fell to his knees. Around him, his people wept. Not just for salvation, but for the human who gave everything to achieve it. Ray's shuttle made it to Section 42. She found the children, trapped but alive. As she loaded them on board, the building collapsed behind her. There was no room left in the shuttle. No space for her and Minho. She told Minho to take controls. He said no, but she said those kids needed a pilot. He was a pilot. She was just the navigator. She smiled. Get them home. She stepped off the shuttle. Minho tried to stop her, but she sealed the door manually. Through the window, she waved at him. Then she turned and ran, leading defense systems away from the shuttle's path. The shuttle escaped. Ray Hong did not. Minho landed with 3,047 refugees, alive because one navigator decided they mattered more than she did. In the northern city, Gina's command post collapsed as final evacuees cleared the zone. She was caught in debris, her legs trapped. Her radio still worked. She reported southern area clear. All civilians accounted for. Bin's voice came through saying they were coming for her. Gina said no time. The whole sector was coming down. Seal the shelter doors. Bin said they don't leave people behind. Gina said you do when it saves 1,000 others. She said, do it, Commander. That's an order from someone who outranks you in stubbornness, if not rank. Through her radio, she heard Bin curse. Then reluctantly, he said, sealing doors. He started to say her name, but she interrupted. She said she knew. It was okay. She was where she needed to be. The building fell. The radio went silent. By the time the sun stabilized, Earth had lost 17 ships and 2,043 people. Valorians lost 200,000, but that was billions fewer than would have died. The impossible mission succeeded. But the cost was written in blood and sacrifice. And every human survivor would carry those names forever. 3 days after the sun stabilized, Elder Thoven stood in the Plaza of Remembrance looking at the monument. It was not fancy or elaborate. The Valorians could create structures that defied gravity and bent light. But they chose something simple. A wall of dark stone. On it, carved in both Valorian and human writing, were 2,043 names. Every human who died saving Valoria. At the top, in larger letters, were 3 names. Suechiana Ray Hong, Gina Han, Captain Yuna stood beside Thoven. Her dress uniform was crisp despite her exhaustion. Behind them, the surviving crew of the Horizon's Edge stood at attention. The humans looked small next to the tall Valorians gathered for the memorial, but they stood with quiet dignity. Thoven said quietly, they could never repay this debt. Yuna said it wasn't a debt. It was a gift. They gave it freely. Thoven turned to face her. His ancient eyes were filled with pain and confusion. He asked her to please help him understand. Human people knew the cost. They knew they would die. They knew Valorians had treated them with contempt and arrogance. So why did they sacrifice themselves? Yuna was quiet, choosing her words carefully. She said that's what it meant to be human. They weren't the smartest species, not the most advanced. They didn't have the best technology or longest history, but they had something the great civilizations seemed to have lost. They cared. When someone was suffering, humans couldn't just calculate if helping was efficient. They had to try. Thovan said bitterly that the great civilizations did calculate. After it was over, after humans had saved Valoria, they sent detailed reports explaining their decision. Helping Valoria would cost too many resources. The technology was too valuable to risk. Valoria's position made them a political problem. They had reasons. Logical, practical reasons, Yuna said, and they let 4 billion people die for those reasons. Thovan said yes. He looked at the monument again. He said Valorians thought they understood advancement. They measured it in technology, in power, in knowledge. They looked at humanity and saw children because humans didn't have their ships or science. But they were wrong. Advancement wasn't about what you knew. It was about who you were. Across the plaza, Solane was speaking with Juan. They had spent every day together since the crisis ended. Juan helping Valorians plan rebuilding. Solane helping humans understand Valorian culture and grief. Solane asked if he would stay. When the Horizon's Edge left, would he stay and help rebuild? Juan smiled. He said he'd like that if they would have him. Solane laughed. The sound was musical. She said, have him. Valorians owed humans everything. Juan pulled their children from fire. He showed them what compassion looked like. Having him there would be an honor. Juan said then he'd stay. He looked around at the recovering world. There was so much work to do. Cities needed rebuilding. Ecosystems were damaged. The trauma would take generations to heal. Celine said softly they weren't doing it alone anymore. She reached out and took his hand. A gesture of friendship in Valorian culture. She said they had allies now. Real ones. Meanwhile, in the Grand Council chambers, a historic meeting was happening. The great civilizations had sent ambassadors, arriving in their grand ships after the crisis was over. They stood before the Valorian Council offering aid, offering trade, offering apologies. Thovan listened to them speak. They had prepared speeches explaining their earlier inaction. They offered logical explanations, strategic considerations, resource problems. Everything was reasonable. Everything made sense. When they finished, Thoven stood. He said the Valorian people thanked them for their offers but must decline. The ambassadors looked shocked. A representative from the Corvaxian Empire, one of the most powerful, spoke up. He said surely Thovan understood the value of their alliance. They could provide technology and resources. Thovan interrupted. He said resources they wouldn't provide when Valorians were dying. Technology they deemed too valuable to share when it was needed most. He asked if they wanted to know what Valorians learned from this crisis. They learned who their real allies were. The Korvaxian's voice dripped with contempt. He said the humans? They were barely interstellar. Their technology was centuries behind. What could they possibly offer that the great civilizations could not? Thovan said simply they could offer their lives. And they did. 2,000 of them died saving Valorians, not because it was profitable, not because it was strategic, but because Valoria asked for help and they answered. That was worth more than all their technology. He stood and gestured to a door. Una entered, flanked by Vel. She carried a data crystal glowing softly in her hand. Thovan announced that the Valorian people had made a decision. They were sharing their complete technological database with Earth. Every advancement made in 10,000 years. Ship design, energy systems, medical technology, stellar mechanics, everything. The ambassadors erupted in protest. The Korvaxians shouted they couldn't do that. The technology accords wouldn't allow it. Thovan cut him off. He said the accords meant nothing to them anymore. Valoria was withdrawing from the Great Civilizations Compact. They no longer wished to associate with cultures that measured life by economic value. He turned to Una. Earth stood with Valoria when no one else would. Now Valoria stood with Earth. Una took the crystal. Her hands trembled slightly. This was more than data. This was knowledge that would advance humanity by centuries. It was a gift beyond measure. She said they accepted this in the spirit it was given, not as payment but as partnership. Thovan said partnership, between equals. The ambassadors left in anger, but Thovan didn't care. The opinion of those who abandoned Valoria no longer mattered. In the following weeks, the partnership took shape. Valorian engineers worked with Tay designing hybrid ships combining both species' strengths. Lena established a medical research facility where human and Valorian doctors shared knowledge. June worked with Vel on stellar mechanics, ensuring no other civilization would face what Valoria had. Day's original distress signal recording was preserved in both archives. It became the founding document of the Human-Valorian Alliance, the moment when two species chose to stand together. 6 months later, a new distress call reached both Earth and Valoria. Another species in trouble, another world facing disaster. This time when the call went out, 2 fleets answered. Una stood on the bridge of the New Horizon's edge, a hybrid ship built by both humans and Valorians. Beside her, Vel commanded the Valorian rescue vessel, Gift of Stars. Day reported they were ready to jump. Vel added the Valorian fleet was standing by. Una looked out at the stars. She thought of Sua, of Ray, of Gina, of all the humans who gave everything so others could live. Their names were carved in stone on Valoria, but their legacy was written in the stars. Una ordered all ships to jump. The fleets vanished, racing toward another world that had prayed to the stars for salvation. This time they wouldn't pray alone. 10 years later, Juan and Selene stood in the Plaza of Remembrance with their daughter. The little girl, half human and half Valorian, looked up at the monument with curious eyes. She asked who they were pointing at the names. Juan said softly, they were heroes. They taught the galaxy an important lesson. The child asked what lesson. Selene knelt beside her daughter. She said being advanced wasn't about how smart you were or what technology you had. It was about whether you helped others when they needed it. The child thought about this. She asked if they were advanced. Selene said they were trying to be. Every day they were trying. The girl pointed at one name. Suajeon. She asked what she did. Juan explained she flew into the sun to save their world. She knew she would die, but she did it anyway because billions of people needed help. The child said that was very brave. Juan agreed. Yes, it was. The girl was quiet, then asked if someone needed help, would they do that too? Juan and Selene looked at each other. They thought of rescue missions they both volunteered for over the years. Other species they helped. The alliance that was growing as more civilizations joined Earth and Valoria, rejecting the cold calculations of the great powers. They both said yes together. The child said good. That's what heroes do. She took their hands and they walked through the plaza together, past the monument toward the rebuilt city beyond. Above them, Valoria's sun shone bright and pure. a constant reminder of the day humanity answered a call that no one else would. In the sky, ships came and went. Human vessels and Valorian ones working together, some heading to Earth, some to Valoria, some to the dozen other worlds that joined the Alliance. Each carried crews of different species working together because they learned the most important lesson. When someone calls for help, you answer. Not because it's profitable, not because it's efficient, but because it's right. The great civilizations still existed, still powerful, still advanced, but their influence was fading. More worlds were choosing to align with Earth and Valoria instead, drawn to an alliance built on compassion rather than calculation. In the end, the galaxy learned that the most advanced civilization wasn't the one with the best weapons or fastest ships. It was the one that valued life above all else. It was the one that answered when someone called. And on that day, so long ago, when Valoria prayed to the stars for saviors, the stars sent calculations and silence. But Earth sent humans, and that made all the difference.